Welcome to Beyond the Badge. Beyond the Badge is an inside look at your Oshkosh Police Department, brought to you through the resources of Oshkosh Community Media Services.
Welcome to this edition of Beyond the Badge. I'm Joe Nichols. On today's show, we'll be talking with Valerie Santana, sex offender registry specialist from the Department of Corrections, about sex offender community notifications. We would like to welcome all of you watching us on GovTV and those of you listening to us on 101.9 Oshkosh FM. Valerie, we welcome you to the show.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming on today and talking with us. And before we get started, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I've been with the Department of Corrections a little over 24 years. I've held a few positions with the department, including probation parole agent and my current position as a specialist with the Sex Offender Registry. I also worked in law enforcement for a couple of years before I started with the department.
Very good. Well, once again, thank you for coming on today's show. And could, when we start here, can you just tell us what community notification is?
Sure. Community notification is when law enforcement notifies the community about certain sex offenders. Okay. And so on June 1st of 1997, the Sex Offender Registration and Community Notification Law went into effect in Wisconsin. Okay. And that gave law enforcement the authority to disseminate that information to the community about certain sex offenders if, in their opinion, it would enhance the protection of the public.
Okay, very good. And so what are some of those things or incidents that really brought about, the community notification, to neighborhoods?
In 1994, the Jacob Wetterling Act was passed, and that mandated that every state have a sex offender registry. And that law was named after an 11-year-old Minnesota boy who was abducted. And then in 1996, Megan's Law was passed. And that was an amendment to the Jacob Wetterling Act that mandated law enforcement notify the community about certain sex offenders. That law was named after a 7-year-old girl who was abducted by a sex offender in New Jersey. And so it gave law enforcement the authority to notify the community when they felt it would be beneficial for the community to know that this offender was getting out and where they were going to live.
Okay, very good. And if memory serves me correct, I think Jacob Wetterling's, the offender was actually caught recently.
Yes,
I
last year.
So. Yeah, last year. Mm-hmm. So good news there.
Yes.
Yeah, very good news. So what is the intent of the law actually?
Well, the intent of the registry is to create a balance between community safety and accountability for the offender. We don't want sex offenders in our community anonymous. Okay. So it assists with the offender's likelihood to reintegrate into the community. Mm-hmm. They are no longer under the radar. We know who they are. We know what they look like. And it gives law enforcement also a tool to have a list of who is sex offenders in their area.
Okay, very good. And I know that citizens can also, they can go on the Wisconsin DOC website and they can actually take a look themselves as to where offenders are living as well.
That's correct.
So, because with law enforcement, we are not always out there. We're not going to be notifying about every sex offender in the city, and that's one of the questions I usually get is, how come everyone isn't notified? Well, we'd be out 24 hours a day, putting out flyers and that type of thing. So you can check out the website. We'll have it up on the board in just a little bit. So have there been any recent law changes to the community notification?
Not to community notification, there hasn't been.
Okay.
There was a recent law change a few years ago that a provision added to the registry statute that offenders had to now provide also internet identifiers. So that would have been the most recent law change.
Okay, very good. Now, with the internet, can all sex offenders be on the internet, or are some excluded from that?
Only sex offenders who are on active supervision, if
Okay.
their probation and parole agent has a rule on them that
Okay.
they cannot access the internet. If they are off supervision, then they can access the internet.
Okay, very good, very good. So, how would you define what a sex offender is?
A sex offender is someone whose criminal sexual behavior was done without consent, was unwanted or forced, or whose behavior poses a risk to the community. There's 31 offenses in Wisconsin that if someone is convicted of one of these sex offenses, it is mandatory that they register.
Okay, very good. So I know a lot of times, people hear the term sex offender. Okay, it brings to someone's mind that someone is lurking behind a bush and they're waiting for kids or unsuspecting victims to walk by, and then the person jumps out at them. Is that what an actual sex offender is?
No, that's a myth. It's a misconception. Sex offenders come from all walks of life, all socioeconomic groups, all ethnic groups, all races. They can be male, female, all ages. There's no typical sex offender.
Okay, all right. And I know that being at sex offender notification meetings and that type of thing, that we talk about secrecy and grooming. Can you explain how that works into a sex offender's favor, I guess?
Sure. Approximately 90% of victims know their offender,
Wow.
and some of them know them very well.
Wow.
So what grooming is a term that we use that sex offenders will gain access to victims and continuous access to the victim. It's befriending the victim and the family and establishing an emotional connection with the child and the family. And it lowers the child's inhibition for sexual abuse. The offender will pay special attention to the child, offer to give the child rides, and really kind of put themselves in a position to be close to that child where people are unsuspecting that they could be harming that child.
Okay, all right. And are there levels of sex offenders and levels of notifications?
Well, the level of sex offenders in Wisconsin is we have what is called special bulletin notification offenders, and those are offenders that have 2 strikes or more, and law enforcement is notified anytime one of those offenders moves. But other than that, the levels of notification are determined by law enforcement and what's called a core team. Every county has a core team that's made up of law enforcement, probation and parole, the sex offender registry, and other community stakeholders. And they determine, based on a lot of factors, what level of notification the community should have should this offender get released from prison and live there or move there.
Okay.
And so level 1 is law enforcement only. Law enforcement gets notified that this offender is being released or moving to the area. Level 2 is targeted for specific groups or individuals based on particular facts of the offense and the case. And then level 3 is the widespread community notification. That's when we have the community meetings and law enforcement will do the door-to-door flyers and media releases. But it's important to remember that the website is there 24/7. And so people can access that website 24 hours a day to see who is in their neighborhood without law enforcement having to provide them a flyer or a notification.
Very good. Yeah, and I know we've got that website up right now on our screen, and if you ever have I guess you just want to look on the website, see who lives in your neighborhood, take a look at it, and it's amazing what is out there. We have people that move in, and neighbors become upset. Why is this person living here? So we tell them, if you take a look at the map and directions, that's not the only person that's living in your neighborhood. So it's a good thing to check out. Many times we get asked also, why is a sex offender moving into my neighborhood? How is it determined where a sex offender can live?
When offenders are released from prison, they usually return to the same area of the state where they lived when they committed their crime. For many offenders, this is also the county where they were convicted. And sometimes offenders are released to another area because of family support or because they found employment in that area or there's treatment available in that area that's not available somewhere else. And we want them to live where they can lead a productive lifestyle.
Okay. Yeah, I know that for a fact on Jefferson Street, we have our temporary living placement. And we get a lot of questions about that in regards to, okay, why this particular residence? Can you just tell us what the TLP is just a little bit?
A TLP is a transitional living placement, and it's normally most counties in Wisconsin have them, and it's transitioning for someone getting out of prison who may not have some place to live right away. Probation parole will place them there for a certain amount of time to help them transition, find a job, and reacclimate themselves to being out in the community.
Okay, very good. And that's a question we get asked quite often at the police department. So if there's a sex offender living in someone's neighborhood, are there extra precautions that somebody should take? We were getting phone calls maybe about a month and a half ago from someone that said, I just can't leave my house anymore because I know this person has moved in. Is that a falsehood, or is that just something that somebody shouldn't be thinking?
Well, I think it is something that is false.
Okay.
It's important to realize sex offenders have always lived in our community. And prior to 1997, there was no notification, there was no website. We didn't know who they were. We didn't get notified when they were released from prison. They were released and moved back into the community, and no one really knew.
Okay.
And so with the current laws, law enforcement is able to release information about sex offenders and discuss sex offenders with the community, and concerned citizens can attend community meetings when someone is released. If there is a level 3 meeting, they can learn as much as they can about the offender, take proactive approaches to safety. So knowing that a registered sex offender is in your neighborhood is the first step to staying safe. You know they're there. Checking on what their conviction is. Is it an offense against a child, an adult? And the website will list that, but there's also CCAP. So people can look someone up on CCAP, find out what their offense was, what they were convicted of. And you want to make informed choices about who your family is going to have contact with. And so the offenders on the registry are the ones that have been arrested and convicted. We know who they are. We have their picture. We know where they live. So there are sex offenders in our communities that we don't know who they are, that have never been arrested. And so taking a proactive approach, being vigilant about anyone your family has contact with, is really the key to preventing sexual assaults.
Very good. Very good. And now I know we talked about the website already, and I know that they've got it up on the board. But how many sex offenders actually live in Winnebago County or Oshkosh?
Well, in Winnebago County, as of yesterday, I ran the numbers for you. There were 495 sex offenders in Winnebago County, and about 180 of them are currently on active supervision. So they have a probation parole agent. In Oshkosh, there's 266 that list Oshkosh as their residents.
Okay, very good. Now they also have to, every year I think they have to update where their residency is if they have to register as a sex offender. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
The minimum is once a year. There are offenders that have to do it more frequently than that.
Okay, very good. Very good. Okay, we'll be right back after this short break with Valerie, and we'll be talking more about the sex offender registry.
Hi, my name is Kate Mann. I'm a police officer for the city of Oshkosh. Ever since I was a little girl, I knew that I wanted to become a police officer. I grew up in a law enforcement family. My dad retired as a sergeant for Dane County, and I knew that I wanted to be involved in a profession in which it was rewarding, challenging, and unpredictable. I love serving the community in which I live in, and I hope to make a positive impact on the community, and that's why I wear the badge.
If you have expired or unused medication, don't flush it, pour it down the drain, or toss it in the trash. Safely dispose of unwanted or expired medications at the drug drop box located inside the Oshkosh Police Department. It's convenient and anonymous, safe and secure, and it's open to everyone 24/7. Drop off your prescriptions, over-the-counter drugs, pet meds, and more. Keep drugs out of the reach of children and out of our water supply. Dispose of unwanted or expired medications at the drug drop box. For more information, visit the Oshkosh Police Department website at oshkoshpd.com.
Welcome back to Beyond the Badge. We are talking with Valerie Santana, Sex Offender Registry Specialist with the Department of Corrections. Thank you again, Valerie, for coming back. And can you tell us, what is the Sex Offender Registry?
The Sex Offender Registry is a database maintained by the Department of Corrections that contains certain information on any person who was convicted, in prison or in jail, or on probation parole of a sex offense on or after December 25th of 1993. And why that date is important is because the registry is not all-inclusive. There are offenders who were convicted prior to this date and had completed their sentences that are not on the registry. And so sex offender registries really started out as a tool for law enforcement and eventually became accessible to the public.
Very good, very good. And so what happens if a sex offender, I think we talked a little earlier that they have to register once a year, some more frequently, but what happens if a sex offender is non-compliant?
There's many reasons why a sex offender could appear on the website as non-compliant under their status. It could be that they just haven't returned their registration letter within the 10 days, as the statute states they have to do. If someone is non-compliant, they're either failing to report their information, falsifying information, and that can lead to criminal proceedings. They can, it's a felony, and it can be up to a $10,000 fine or 6 years in prison or both. Wow. If they are convicted of failing to comply with the registry.
Wow, big fines and big jail time, yeah. So how is that different from a sex offender violating their rules? How does that work?
If a sex offender actually has rules, that means they're on active supervision. Okay. That means they have a probation and parole agent who has given them a set of rules they have to abide by while they are reintegrating back into the community. Once they are off supervision, they do not have rules. They just need to comply with the registry and certain statutes that apply to sex offenders.
Okay, very good. So if someone would happen to see a rule being broken by a sex offender, who would they call? Do they call the police department? Do they call you? Is there some other number that they can call?
I think the first call should be to law enforcement, and law enforcement can help them decide, is this offender on active supervision or not? If they're on active supervision, then the probation agent is who needs to be contacted with that information, and they will respond to it and investigate it. If they're off supervision, then it's really a law enforcement investigation if there's something going on that just doesn't seem right.
Okay, very good, very good. We get that question every once in a while as well. So what is electronic monitoring? They've got all different types nowadays. We remember the old bracelet and that type of thing. I'm sure it's still used. And GPS, how are they used?
Well, electronic monitoring is a tool that Department of Corrections uses for active supervision offenders. And they wear an ankle bracelet. It transmits a signal to a receiver. And if the offender moves out of range, an electronic signal is generated and transmitted to a monitoring center that's staffed 24 hours a day. So the technology is really effective for what it's intended to do, and that is to track whether or not the offender is home when they're supposed to be home. Okay. Offenders can be authorized to leave their home for work, treatment, school, and other activities that is approved by their agent. When an offender is attending a pre-approved activity away from home, that offender is not really being monitored. We just know they're not at home. They're out of their range. If an offender attempts to remove the bracelet or tamper with the unit, the monitoring center is notified, and in turn the monitoring center will notify the proper authorities. GPS monitoring, or Global Positioning System monitoring, is used to establish offender location and track offender movement. GPS monitoring, again, is a tool just like electronic monitoring, and supervising offenders that meet specific criteria. Offenders who are placed on GPS on active supervision have schedules and zones they can and cannot be in. But there are certain offenders who are required to wear a GPS device that are no longer on supervision, and they'll have to wear it for their lifetime.
Okay, very good. And I guess that, I'm sure people are thinking, oh, this is CSI, we have an hour-long television program. We can pinpoint exactly where that person is every minute of the day. Is that how GPS is working with sex offenders?
Yes.
It is. Very
Our
good.
monitoring center is able to locate someone 24 hours a day that is wearing a GPS unit, and they can also go back and see where that person has been.
Wow.
That have been on a GPS unit.
Quite a monitoring system then.
It is, and it's a really useful tool for law enforcement. If they were to have an incident happen in a certain geographical area, they can contact the monitoring center or one of our GPS specialists and find out if anyone who was wearing a GPS was within that vicinity.
Okay, very good. Well, that's interesting. So, and we've also heard the terms of sexual predator or pedophile. How are these different from a sex offender?
Well, a sexual predator is a term frequently misused for the correct term, which is a sexually violent person. In Wisconsin, a sexually violent person is someone who's been committed civilly under the Chapter 980 of Wisconsin statutes. And the basic requirements to pursue this commitment is the offender has been previously convicted of certain sexually violent offenses, and they've been diagnosed with a mental disorder that predisposes that person to engage in further sexual violence. The state then petitions for a civil commitment under Chapter 980 when the offender is within 90 days of being released from prison. So this is beyond their prison term. So once their prison term has ended, they could potentially be committed for longer under a civil commitment.
Okay.
So if a civil court orders the commitment, the court can then decide if and when that person should be released back into the community. And the term pedophile is actually referring to a psychiatric disorder in which the individual has a primary sexual attraction to children. Not all sex offenders are pedophiles, and not all offenders convicted of sexually assaulting a child could be classified as a pedophile.
Okay. All right. Well, it's good to know now. I mean, because you hear those terms thrown out there from a lot in the community, and now we've got a good clarification on that and exactly what it is. So, can you tell us about protective behaviors? How is this important to the community, especially children?
Protective behaviors are behaviors we want to teach our children to reduce their likelihood that they'll become a victim. And so we want to go beyond stranger danger, because remember, about 90% of victims know their offender. So if we're only teaching our kids to be fearful of strangers, we're missing a big chunk of who could possibly harm that child. And so we want to teach kids to trust their instincts, to have several trusted adults that they can go to and tell anything to. There's nothing, we want them to understand there's nothing that is so bad you can't tell someone. And we want to practice what-if scenarios with our kids, not just about sexual abuse, but what-if scenarios such as, what if you come home from school and the doors are locked and mom and dad aren't home? What can you do? And these scenarios, practicing them, teach these kids problem solving. So if they do get in a situation that makes them feel uncomfortable or unsafe, their brain has been trained to problem solve, how to get themselves out of that situation. And we also want to teach our kids that it's okay to say no to an adult that makes them feel scared or uncomfortable or confused, and that adults shouldn't be asking children to keep secrets that make them feel uncomfortable. And lastly, we really want our kids to practice using what we call the 3 W's whenever they leave. And it's always telling someone where you're going, who you're going with, and when you're going to be back. Having those 3 questions answered gives us a good idea of where our children are and who they're with should something happen. We don't want to end up in a situation where, they left with a friend and I'm not sure where they were going. And so those are really good habits to get into when trying to teach our children how to stay safe.
Okay, very good. Now, I know you had mentioned stranger danger, and I get that question once in a while. Is stranger danger even in existence anymore, or is it something that they've kind of said don't do it because of the don't do the program only due to the fact that 90% of the offenders know the victim? Is that a true statement then, that it's no longer in use?
I think it's still in use because we still do want to teach our kids to be fearful of someone they don't know, just in case. But at the same time, a child could find themselves in a situation where a stranger is their only person that can help them. So if they get lost in a store or at a park, they may have to ask a stranger for help. What we really want to teach them is to trust their feelings, that uh-oh feeling if someone's making them uncomfortable. And so it could be from anyone, not just people you don't know, because what an offender could do if a child only knows stranger danger is say, well, my name's Valerie. I'm no longer a stranger. Sure. And so, offenders who want access to kids are pretty good at manipulating. Yeah. And so they can get past that stranger danger barrier pretty easily.
Yeah, they probably recognize the dangers that are out there. The other thing we were talking about is keeping the lines of communication open between parents and kids, that there should always be that avenue where the kids can go to. And I know in some instances, some kids, they're told, oh, this is a secret, you got to keep it, between us. How do parents open up that line of communication just to say, there are no secrets. You tell me if something's going on.
I think parents need to practice that. Having the talk once a year isn't enough. I think parents need to always practice that, you can tell me anything, you can trust me. They have to give the child a feeling of safety, that they're not going to overreact if the child does tell them something, that they're going to stay calm. And that if a child gets into any type of situation, it's not the child's fault, and we don't want to blame them. And offenders do tell children to keep things secret. And we also need to teach our kids, if you don't feel comfortable telling mom or dad, then you can tell so-and-so. We need to have other trusted adults, because sometimes children don't want to tell their parents because they don't want to upset their parents, or maybe the offender had threatened to harm someone in the family. So we want them to have other trusted adults they can go to if something's happening to them.
Fantastic. Great information, and we greatly appreciate you coming on today's show and talking with us about sex offenders in our community. So thank you very much, Valerie.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. And we once again thank Valerie for being on today's show and talking with us about the sex offender program. We thank all of you watching us on GovTV and listening to us on 101.9 Oshkosh FM. Remember, if you have questions about sex offenders living in your neighborhood, please go to the website of offender.doc.state.wi.us/public/ for more information. The Oshkosh Police Department has sent many reminders to citizens through social media and conventional media outlets that they should remove their valuables from their car and then lock your doors to vehicles. Thieves will get to your personal belongings if you don't secure them. We have had a rash of thefts from vehicles in the last couple of months, and we want you to keep yourself and your neighborhood safe. So please remove the valuables from your vehicle and lock the doors. Thank you. Oshkosh Police Department will be unveiling their new website very soon. We hope that you're going to be liking the new look to it. It is more user-friendly, has many updates that you can enjoy. So remember to know us before you need us. One segment that you did see earlier in the break was why I wear the badge. Periodically, you're going to be seeing new officers that will be on telling why they are wearing the badge. So hopefully you enjoy that segment as well. Until next time, remember to stay safe and drive slow in the snow.